Hi, my name's Chris. I'm a senior technical SEO at Deepcrawl, and today I want to talk to you about Google, Cybersecurity and You, and what it means to be security savvy as an SEO in 2022. So before we start, a quick explanation as to who I am so you know that I'm trustworthy. My name is Chris. I've worked in SEO for almost 15 years now. I have a really unhealthy interest in breaking things to see how they work and making things do things they weren't really supposed to, right? And because of that, I'm a member of the professional services team at Deepcrawl, working with some of the biggest websites on earth, both in terms of brand and in terms of actual physical size. And I spend my days finding and diagnosing and fixing issues that range from really, really mundane to really, really weird, really ephemeral, really strange. And as such, and especially as time goes on, we see a lot of weird SEO issues that also tie back into security problems. So first off, why should you be concerned about security, right? We're SEOs. Why should we be concerned about security? And the answer to that is that 60% of small businesses close within 6 months of a data breach, right? Based on that, you might think that security is not your job. I've got news for you. If the business you work for shuts, that's your job. And as well as direct financial damage to reputation and customer confidence can be long-term as well. Forgetting even a penalty for now, a Google penalty. Nobody wants to buy from the site that's been hacked, right? Nobody wants to work for the site that's been work with the site that's been hacked. You get that reputation, people start to skip over you in the results. Also, you don't have to be targeted to be a victim of malicious activity, right? People quite often think, "Oh, well, I've got no enemies. I work in a really specific niche, or I'm friends with everybody in the space. We don't have anybody who would want to harm us. How could that be a problem?" And the truth is, you don't have to be targeted. You just have to sometimes be a unwilling host for these things. There are stories all the time of just people with the right the right set of config files, or the right unupdated WordPress plugins. As long as you've got that, as long as you can be a host for these malicious actors, they will find a way to exploit that. Fourth, SEO performance can always be affected by a breach. If people are able to get into your production servers and deface your website, that begins to affect search performance, right? Especially if they can do things like start changing titles, descriptions. Obviously, nowadays, Google doesn't use the titles and descriptions, bless them, that we give them as much as they used to. But those titles and descriptions that you set are still, or those titles and descriptions, even when Google creates their own, are still based on the content on the page. If the content on the page is no longer well optimized, doesn't include your brand, doesn't include all your search terms, then that will get hit. Also, in the case of certain hacks, sites become very obviously, visibly hacked in search results. You would skip over them if you saw them in search results because they are all of a sudden British or English language websites, at least, that suddenly have loads of Japanese or Vietnamese text in search results. Straight away, that is obviously or worse, English text around pharma, casinos, the usual kind of not safe for work stuff. At that point, if I was searching for a new carpet to buy and one of the top results had a load of links to a Vietnamese casino on it, I wouldn't be visiting that website. I wouldn't trust that my details were safe with them. And finally, Googlebot is the most common user agent used by malicious actors. When I say malicious actors, I mean hackers, but I don't want it to sound like it's I don't want to sound like a film from the 90s. People tend to use Googlebot user agents because a lot of sites give Googlebot a little bit of an easier time. They tend to be blocked less because obviously most websites want Google visiting their websites. And the likelihood is, if you are an experienced SEO, and especially a technical SEO, the likelihood is you stand in better stead of recognizing a not real Googlebot request than most other people in the business. So if there are attacks, even if it doesn't necessarily affect the SEO performance of the site, there's a very, very good chance that you might be called in because that hack says it was Google. Also, to look at it another way around as well, what we see a lot is if sometimes Google goes on a little bit of a request spree, as we see it does on a lot of sites, every so often an overzealous security team will block Google and say, well, it says it was Google, but it hit the site 3 million times yesterday, and that might well be Google. You know what I mean? You can get that information from Search Console. So you need to be able to recognize what is a real and what is not a real Googlebot. Otherwise, you start getting Googlebot blocked on your website, or it's possible that you can. So where do we directly come into this, right? Okay, what can happen to us directly as SEOs that can happen to the site that can affect our SEO? So a big thing that we see a lot is effectively using your site. So again, you may well work for a big brand, or you may work for a small brand that's had to put a lot of work into building the brand that they have up. Hackers, malicious actors, etc., generally speaking, don't care about. They're normally in something for a quick bit of money, gained however legally or morally they're prepared to gain it. But effectively, what's quite often you see is that people will use or try to use a big or well-known website to effectively leech their link equity off them. They will find a way to create redirects or create links on sites and improve performance then for affiliate or farmer or other NSFW products. Again, I'm including affiliate in there. Obviously, affiliate isn't necessarily dodgy or an NSFW space to be in, but obviously quite often you find that obviously, again, a lot of hackers aren't selling a physical product, right? They're trying to make money in whatever the way they can, and if the way they're going to make that money is through a link on an affiliate link on a well-trafficked site, or a affiliate redirect on a well-trafficked site, they're going to do it. Then getting a little bit more malicious is forcing a site to be in contravention of Google's policies, or in some cases even laws, thus resulting in a penalty or a takedown. Effectively, if a malicious actor can inject, say, copyrighted material into your site, and then report you to via the DMCA, the Digital Millennium Copyright Act, that's a very, very good way for them to make you disappear out of search results. I think the statistic is a DMCA takedown can drop sites' traffic by something like 98% or so, something like that. Similarly, like as mentioned before, making your site look bad in search results. Again, if they can make your entry in the SERPs look spammy or hacked or broken in some way, people are going to skip it. Again, that requires a certain level of actual malice and actual targeting, but it's something that is easily doable to SEO. And then finally, just good old-fashioned wanting to watch the world burn, or moral or ethical reasons to dislike a business as well. We live in a world of hacktivism, and we will live in a world of people like 4chan and Anonymous, etc., who sometimes will do something because they decide they've taken a dislike to you, or sometimes for no reason. And that is a thing that we have to be careful for. This is my point earlier about not needing to be targeted anymore. It might just be that somebody has a scanner and they find that your site is vulnerable to the thing that they're currently looking for. So before we go any further, I just want to point out I'm not a security expert. I'm a technical SEO who is either cursed or blessed with the ability to find these sorts of issues. This talk is about preventing issues where possible and learning how to find problems to report to your SecOps and DevOps teams. I don't know, when I used to be in-house, I don't know if this is the same everywhere, but SEO did not have a good reputation, or certainly when I started, SEO did not have a good reputation with the security team, and it took a lot of work to get them to understand that we do know how the internet works, actually. So you're in now. Obviously, I've convinced you that you should be interested in this. So the question is, what can I do as an SEO, right? What can I do as somebody who has a view of my website every day, works on the website every day? What can I do to help my security team out and make the site more secure? Well, as I previously mentioned, we have, as SEOs, a really unique view of websites, right? We have Search Console, which is Google's view of the world, which is really, really interesting. It's basically Google reporting to a limited extent, never as much as we'd like, what it saw when it visited your website. And that's really important. What Google saw is really, really important. Next up is log files. Log files show us, what actually happened when somebody. It shows the server activity of your site. Again, it's not unique that SEOs have this data, but it's when tied in with everything else, it becomes a really important part of the puzzle. It's something that we've got, right? Log files are unassailable truth. It's not Google reporting back with what it says it sees, because we know there's sometimes some massaging there. Instead, this is the actual raw data that is coming out of your server and being transmitted over the internet. Super important. We also have GA, Google Analytics, which shows us what customers are seeing, what customers are doing, right? This is a demonstration of how users are interacting with our websites. We have backlinks. Not many other people in the business, maybe reputation management teams and things like that, are ever looking at backlinks and what people are saying about our website elsewhere, and where is linking to it. Where is often very important. We have spiders and tools like that. Obviously, things like Deepcrawl, Screaming Frog. They're a great answer to the question, what happens if you just leave a robot to wander around your site and see what it finds? And finally, and most importantly, actually, we have Google. Google is everybody else's view of the business that you work for, right? You know what things are like day to day in the business you work in, but anybody else, if they want to find out anything about your business, the first thing they do is they type the name into Google, or they type your website name into Google. And the things that you can find when you Google your brand and terms around it is really, really interesting, and occasionally can lead to real security issues potentially. So like I said, there's 3 ways you can provide security benefits, right? We can prevent risk, we can identify weaknesses, and we can identify malicious activity as well. So effectively, preventing risks is building things in a way that means that they are, I'd hesitate to say safe, but building things with a security forward mindset. Secondly is identifying weaknesses. That is noticing stuff that has gone live, gone into production, that potentially has problems and might be an area of the site that only really you deal with, or an interaction in a particular way with the site that only really you deal with, or a thing that you've noticed that Google can get into that nobody else has noticed. And then finally, identifying malicious activity, and that is identifying when people have either exploited a weakness or are looking for weaknesses to exploit on the site. So let's start off with the big one, right? Robots.txt. Every SEO's friend. It's a great way of keeping Google out of folders and files that you don't really want it getting into. But the issue with that is, Deepcrawl.com has a robots.txt. I don't even know who you work for, person on the other side of this camera, but what I do know is the likelihood is your website has a robots.txt, and the things in your robots.txt are stuff that you don't really want in the public eye to some extent, or you don't want Google sniffing around for whatever reason. Obviously, there's always really sensible reasons to not put stuff into robots.txt. public stuff that you don't really want Google to bother indexing, search URLs, things like that. But consider whether you want to announce the existence of these folders and files, basically speaking to the entire world, right? Again, things like disallowing a WP login, a WordPress login page. It's very easy to work out if a site is using WordPress or not. You know that if it has WordPress, it will have a WordPress login somewhere on the site. Again, ideally, I would recommend changing that URL. So I don't get too nervous though about seeing a disallowed WP login in somebody's robots.txt. But if you have something like the line from the second to bottom there, /really secret folder, don't do that. You know what I mean? I'm hopefully when I say this, there's nobody who's actually doing this. If you've got all your user data in a specific folder that's publicly accessible, don't put that in robots.txt. Say ideally, make sure that's not publicly accessible. But again, just consider whether you want this information to be public knowledge. Instead, consider using the xrobots tag, the xrobots header to prevent indexation of this stuff instead. Or better yet, if it's something that's really private, or that you have an obligation, a legal obligation to control, then block non-verified visits to those URLs via a login, via VPN access, etc., etc. As an aside, if you allow user-generated content, consider what could happen if a user is allowed to create a robots.txt slug. So if your site is site.com/user, what happens is the question you need to ask if their username is robots.txt. Like the worst possible scenario is that they then somehow manage to find a way to inject JavaScript. They set up a meta refresh to a robots.txt somewhere else, which Google will follow and use. At that point, they robots.txt your entire site. That said, if somebody's managing to inject meta refresh redirects, you've probably got bigger problems on your hands. But that's something that someone could very quietly do to very quietly take down a website. Little things like this. Now, this is my thing about talking about identifying weaknesses as well as preventing risks in the first place. So another great thing you can do, set up a Google alert for site:/github.com, and then in quotes your website, or your subdomain, or your API endpoint, whatever you have, your CDN, and catch devs storing private keys, API keys, access tokens, that sort of thing, in public GitHub repos. We see this all the time. This actually happened accidentally to me. I was working for a client and created a clone of their page in order to do some page speed work. Within about 6 hours of having created it and putting it into my GitHub repo in order to start working on, we got a call from their global head of SEO asking why I had one of their Google Cloud API keys in my publicly accessible repo. Turns out the HTML surfaced that API key, and that was now crawlable. So again, I unwittingly found that. We fixed the issue and we moved on. But this is the sort of thing that I mean. That could have been a more malicious actor who now has access to a fairly large brand's Google API. Also, it allows you to catch nefarious actors who might be targeting these domains with scripts or code or whatever. You would be amazed the amount of stuff that people just leave out there. And I would also recommend doing this with sites:/drive.google.com. Real interesting. Just see what is out there on Google Drive that's publicly accessible that mentions the website you work for. You'd be amazed the amount of, or again for your clients, you might, if you're an agency, you might well find your rival agency saying, well, they're currently working with so and so, but I reckon we can steal them. You might find it's amazing the sort of stuff you might find, and you never know the stuff you might find unless you start checking this stuff. Is my point. Also, it's worth remembering or worth trying. Keep an eye out on what shows up for an image search for your brand. and just ask what you can see in the background of office photos and things from news stories. Again, Google Images especially has a weird way sometimes of picking images you might not expect to rank really, really well for search terms, and it pulls things from social media and various different places. And it means that all of a sudden a very, very innocuous picture that somebody took one day in the office has put on their social media, but in the background there's publicly personally identifiable information or something like that in it on a monitor, or an invoice on a desk, and anything like that weird. There's a concept called jigsaw identification. A hacker doesn't need to find perfect information, right? They can find pieces from all over the place, from Facebook and a little bit from LinkedIn and a little bit from Twitter, and they can build a profile of people or of a business, and then use that again as a vector of attack. And like I say, this also applies to social media. Go to LinkedIn right now and do a search for first day and see how many people there are posting pictures of their entire new starter kit, what their access badge looks like, what their what all the swag looks like, the stuff that they need to get into the building, where the building is, all this stuff. Again, if you work in a very specific place, sometimes someone can work out from the view from the building where your office is, things like this. Again, unless you are a massive business or you work for, I don't know, the CIA, you probably don't need to be too concerned about people working out where your office is. Again, sometimes that information is publicly accessible information. But what your passes look like is something that ideally you could do with not being totally public information, right? Because all it takes is, once I know what your pass looks like, I can recreate that pass. I stand a better chance at being able to surf in behind somebody on the way into the building one day. Next up, and this might seem obvious, but I think it's a thing that we sometimes forget to do, is crawl your site using a Google user agent. It's worth doing purely because there are hacks out there that, to all intents and purposes, the site seems normal unless you request a page as a Google user agent. So just try it, see what comes up, right? We forget Screaming Frog by default declares itself as Screaming Frog. Deepcrawl does declare itself as Deepcrawl, but it declares itself as Googlebot/Deepcrawl, which might be enough to break the sort of behavior, the mechanic I'm talking about. So just find a Googlebot actual user agent and see what happens when you crawl your site using it. And also, don't worry too much if that crawl crashes. It just means that your security team are already one step ahead of you, and probably Cloudflare is going, "This isn't real Googlebot," and is slapping your hands as you try it. Next thing we can do, and again, this seems obvious, but it's a thing that I think we sometimes allow tools to do this, and maybe don't check as much as we should, is monitor your SERPs and see what results for your site look like, right? WordPress sites in particular are susceptible to compromise due to the fact that they're so off the shelf, and due to the fact that obviously if you have a WordPress site with even 3 or 4 plugins, you then have a WordPress site that is being maintained by, realistically, yourself and 3 or 4 other teams, right? And you don't know for a fact that they're always keeping things fully up to date. You don't know or understand their code bases. You're relying on them to patch out vulnerabilities. As a result of this, there's a famous hack known as the farmer hack, which has recently kind of been overtaken by what's been known as the Japanese keyword hack. As previously mentioned, can serve spammy content to Google, and this is a couple of examples on it on the left-hand side here. This is a German retailer that is now no longer serving links to products in German as they previously were. Those pages have now, as far as Google is concerned, been overtaken by links to stuff in Japan. Those pages, if you request them as a normal user, will look totally normal, but if you request them as Googlebot, they will be, as I say, full of links to Japanese products. They'll be full of images, all sorts of strange stuff. And again, this is people trying to hijack the link equity from your site, right? They are building pages, and sometimes they will build millions of pages as well in random folders. You can see there, this is a German site, but they now have a folder entitled Diet, entitled DVD, entitled Advertising, and within those folders there will be millions of pages, as well as ruining your normal pages. And they'll be full of links to other websites, because a link from your website is worth something to a hacker. And again, it might be worth 3 affiliate sales a day, but if it's cost them nothing to get that link on your site, then they're going to do it, right? Also, Google search results will say this domain, this site might be hacked. So again, if you're seeing that next to your site, you need to start doing some investigation as to what's happened. And then finally, and this is kind of the big one, is question things that look weird, right? Look into outliers and go down rabbit holes and think laterally about why something has happened. So this is a real-world example at the bottom here. I was doing some log file analysis from a client who wasn't being crawled as much as they thought they should have been. Straight away now, when I pull the data here from January through to February, obviously I can see that huge spike there just after the 23rd of Jan, and that really stands out, right? That's weird. Every other day they're getting 100-200 requests. All of a sudden on this day they got over 2,000. Now, as an SEO, I want to understand why that is, but also as someone with a security-focused mindset, I'm thinking, well, that's a little bit weird, right? But it says it's Googlebot, right? All those user agents say it's Googlebot, so shouldn't be a problem. Except when you start looking at the URLs it's requesting, all of them are a known endpoints for a WordPress plugin that use a file, or WordPress plugins that use a file called eval.stdin.php. I don't know what it does, and it's not particularly important for the case of this talk, but broadly speaking, it's a PHP file with a known vulnerability inside it that basically you can send a post request to, and that file will just execute it without question, right? Enormously insecure. Also, another thing that's really, really strange about this is that URL that the request is coming from, static 51.46.16, that is not a Google IP, right? Google's IPs are all publicly accessible now. You can go and get a list of them, and you can use them for your own checks. So straight away, this is something that doesn't smell right. The interesting thing about this, so obviously once I did the research and found out about this, the vulnerability in this file, I could then go back into these search results and then search specifically for post requests to those files. Luckily, we didn't find anything. All of the requested URLs 404'd, so it doesn't look like the potential attacker in this instance found something. But if this client was using any of those compromised, or not even compromised, vulnerable WordPress plugins, then the attacker would have been in and would have had a website that they could execute HTML or PHP, into, and broadly speaking, at that point they can do pretty much whatever they want with the site within reason. Finally, Search Console. Search Console will straight up tell you if Google believes your site has been compromised, right? It will show you a big warning like this one on the right hand side here and say an issue has been detected. There is a problem with your website. And keep an eye on all those subdomains that you don't use anymore, right? Those subdomains that you leave to rot, that you no longer own the hosting for, but you still own the URL. If the domain name still points to an IP, and someone else is now using hosting pointing to that IP, as far as Google's concerned, you still own it. And then at that point, your domain is pointing to, if somebody then puts illegal content on there, your domain is pointing to that legal content. That's a problem, right? And again, a DMCA takedown or penalty request can drop a domain's traffic by 90%. Also, make sure the inbox is monitored. Especially a lot of sites with a long history or big agencies, there's not always somebody monitoring that account owner inbox. Make sure somebody is looking at that so they get those notifications. So in summary, get to know your site, right? Understand what your site normally looks like. Understand how many results Google normally says there is for a site colon search in your site. How big is it? When you normally crawl your site, how many URLs do you get? If there's normally about 10,000 and suddenly all of a sudden there's 20,000 one day, why? There might be a good reason for it, but ask that question. What do your SERPs look like? Actually go and look at your own SERPs, yeah? Be vigilant of changes, especially changes that you haven't made, especially if they affect SEO. Set up alerts, automate crawls so that you have a constant baseline understanding. Spend time in Search Console. When I was in-house, I definitely didn't do this enough. Anything you really don't want Google or use, fine. Shouldn't be in your robots.txt. And finally, go down rabbit holes, ask questions, investigate anomalies. Just always, again, think laterally. Ask why things are the way they are. Don't just accept that they are the way that they are. Thanks very much. That's everything from me. I hope you've really enjoyed this. If you do have any questions, you can find me on LinkedIn. Just search for me. It's Chris Spann on LinkedIn. I'd be more than happy to talk to you about this stuff. I really enjoy it. And yeah, thank you.